Hello everyone, and as we wind down the last days before Passover, I wish everyone a very meaningful, transcendent and liberating holiday, which is the essence of Pesach. Call it in the Torah, it's called Zman Cheruseinu, the time of our freedom, of our redemption, our salvation. On a basic level, it's because that is when the first Exodus took place. That would essentially be the prototype of many Exodus that would come, where the Jewish people were enslaved for 210 years in a horrible bondage, slavery, persecution, genocide under the Egyptians. And as the Bible tells the story, on the 15th of Nisan, middle of the day, they finally left that God-forsaken place. It was called the book of Exodus, Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is leaving Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. But, as I always emphasize here, it's far more than just a physical exodus of leaving a certain country or leaving a certain state of servitude. That the word Mitzrayim in Hebrew really comes from the root Mitzarim, which means boundaries, constraints, constrictions, inhibitions. So really, and this is the true meaning of why it's so significant, Passover, and why it's so significant thousands of years later in our time today, is because the spiritual exodus is one that is as relevant today as ever. And that is the need to get out of our own fears and inhibitions and insecurities and addictions and all the different triggers and forces that shape and define us. So there's nobody on earth that will say that they've reached perfection in this regard. We all have our constraints. We all have our Mitzrayim. So we all have the need to find ways to transcend, to free ourselves. So in truth, the purpose of the holiday is a universal one for all people, of all backgrounds, and one that has to have impact not just for 7-8 days of the holiday, but really all year round. But as we discussed many times, in the Jewish mysticism they teach that time is a cycle, it's like a spiral, which means that when we arrive at the same point in time every year, the energy of that moment in time is renewed, which is why we celebrate our birthdays, we celebrate significant days exactly the same day that it took place. It's not just because we're remembering a date, because there's actually something that happens in the air on that particular time period or time or day or night. So we have actually an opportunity, an energy, a door opens up, a window of opportunity that opens up coming next Monday evening that we can all tap into. But like any energy, if you don't have the containers, if you don't have the vehicles, the tools to which to draw that energy into our lives, and to not just draw it, but also to contain it and allow it to be integrated and internalized, the energy will dissipate. So that's what we're here to talk about, of how we can do that. So we have the traditional Passover Seder, which for many is a traditional ritualistic steps, but when you look deeper into it, you find that it's actually a 15-step program toward freedom. The original 15-step program. So I don't know if you all have this laminated card that was here. If you don't have it, you can pick it up right there. I'm going to go through these steps, at least the general steps. The objective of being actually to be able to take a Seder and transform it into a really life-changing experience. Growing up myself in a traditional home, the Seder was always very intense, very serious. I frankly didn't always see the personal relevance in everything that was taking place. So for me it became very clear and very important that a Seder, and to that matter any ritual, any tradition, if you don't know how to play the music, then it sounds hollow and empty. The key here is not just not bang on the piano or on the instrument, or in the case of the Seder to just go through the motions, but to actually see it as tools of tools that help us achieve a form of transcendence. Now, not to overgeneralize, when one wonders, like, what is the single greatest enemy that we have? And I mean enemy, I mean now in an internal way, psychological enemy. So I was just talking to a good friend of mine who's discovered some new methods, right, Eric? But there's also there's new methods, and there's methods that was always there and just were not discovered. So I'm sure you can testify, and anyone who's ever worked in any healing field or in fields of therapy or other psychological areas, that when you understand the mystical and the psychological significance of Jewish traditions, it's amazing how they're all contained in there and remain hidden secrets. And we need to have other sources or other wisdoms to help us uncover them. But I have no doubt that if someone really mastered the 15 steps of the Seder, they could actually find a real method of getting beyond things that are trapping them. And we all have our trappings. So I'll obviously discuss the steps, but the first few things that we have to spell out is what is the core root of our biggest challenge, and how do we attack that in a way that's not a full or outright assault on our psyches, which most of us cannot tolerate, no one can tolerate, but something that's actually productive and constructive. Because it's one thing someone can point out to you that that you're your own worst enemy. It doesn't mean they're necessarily giving you tools what to do about it. It's very nice. Someone can criticize and say, hey, you're doing everything wrong. But now what? So the key is with the what, not whether we're doing wrong or not, but what are you going to do about it? And ways that we can tolerate, ways that we can find the baby steps, or whatever the necessary steps are, that work for us. So always hearing the truth is not necessarily enough. Hearing the truth, it just gives you clarity in certain areas. Most importantly is for us to be able to integrate that truth and make it work in our lives, including all the distortions or blind spots and so on that we may have. So this isn't just about some type of like magic pill you just take and everything changes. It requires our own particular investment, our own input, our own application, applying ourselves to the methods. But then when you use, like any technique, any exercise, if you use the exercise helps you, but you have to be the one that actually does it and personalizes it. So the first thing I have to say is that the biggest enemy that we all have is ourselves. What do I mean by ourselves? I don't mean the general self. It means our perception of ourself. The perceived self. The perceived self is what dictates most of your choices. Based on what you think you are, based on what you think others expect, based on what you think how you should be reacting, based on even impulses and knee-jerk reactions, but how you perceive what is it that satisfies any particular void, vacuum, empty need. The perceived self was defined by what? By a jumble of many, many different forces, including childhood experiences, different trauma, different lacks and neediness that we've developed through the years. Every one of us has their own pathology and own particular makeup. So no two people are alike. But our profile consists of our entire history, which includes, as I said, our childhoods, our teenage years, our education, and all the other factors that all the other forces and factors that have shaped and defined and who we would become as adults. So there's a perceived self, and then there's a real self, meaning who you really are, which is far harder to access, especially when your perceived self is not aligned with your true self. Pesach is meant to help us illuminate a little more about the real self, and a little less about, and rather focus more on what the real self is, and also in contrast to see what the perceived self is and if it's completely accurate. Now the trap here is, and this is the catch-22, if the perceived self is the problem and it's you who has to make a change, your change is going to be based on your own perceived self, which is the problem. How do you deal with that conflict? In other words, your subjectivity doesn't allow you to really see it in a different way. Now, you may see it intellectually, but emotionally, your reactions are the ones that are both the trap and that which needs to be changed. And as the rule goes, as I think Einstein may have said, no system can be changed from within itself, because the system itself is part of part of the issue, whether it's part of the problem or part of the solution. So in other words, we need to access something a bit out of our system, which is why Pesach is very different. That's why it requires a shift. Some people say, well, why do we have to go ahead and search for every crumb and clean our homes, and the whole obsession with Passover's prohibitions not to eat bread, the different traditions, matzah, how we prepare matzah. I mean, laws of Passover are probably more intricate than almost all the laws in Judaism, and all the aspects of it. Why is it so important? Because that alone, the shift that you get out of your usual comfort zone and you're forced to go into another environment in every possible way, you're not going to eat the same thing you eat. You're not going to do the same thing you do. You're going to eat new things. All the things we say about manashtano, how is this night different? It's different. The difference itself is already the first step in any type of situation. There's an expression in the Torah that says, Mishana Malka, Mishana Mazel. You want to change your fortune, you change your space, you change your environment. Because as long as you're in a toxic environment, you continue to breathe toxins, how exactly are you going to change anything? As I said, the trap is, you are the trap. Your routines are the trap, your customs, your habits, everything you've been doing, your perception. So one of the beautiful methods to use is to force yourself out of that comfort zone. And Pesach, that's exactly what Passover is meant to do. As a matter of fact, maybe aware of this, that when many of the changes we make a Passover night are in order to provoke children to ask questions. For example, the dipping. Why do you dip? Why do you dip twice? We say in the Manashtan, you dip mar and charesas, right? The bitter herbs in that paste that's made out of nuts and wine and what else? What's it? Apples, right? And stuff like that. And the second time, you dip the karpas in Salzwasser, or actually the other way, the order. Karpas in Salzwasser, which is a piece of vegetable, either potato or an onion, in salt water. So the answer given is, why do we do that? In order to provoke the children to ask questions. Interesting answer. In other words, it's not because commemorating something that happened. Like, for example, why we eat bitter herbs is to remember the empathy that when another suffers. Matzah is to remember the matzah they ate. Here, it's in order to provoke the children. Now, when you think of children, you don't just mean that children, physical children, it's also the inner child within each of us. It's to provoke. What provokes people? When there's a shift, when there's a change. When things are just riding in a conventional way, you don't feel a shift. So the first thing that Passover does, even before any type of details, is the shift into a new space, into a new time and space, which many people don't even realize the significance of that. You often see that one of the appeals of travel, and my good friend, the appeal of travel to new places is because you go to a new place, it's a new environment. New environment tends to challenge you. I was reading recently, there's an ad agency, a very creative ad agency in California. What they do is, when they have a new project and they have a new client, especially they need to come up with very creative ideas for an advertising campaign, they take them all to an amusement park that they rent out somewhere, completely different city, and they spend an entire day there playing like children in sandboxes and on swings. When's the last time you went into a sandbox or swings? They're taking them completely into a new environment, an environment that brings them back to their little children's kindergarten years, literally like a playground, and they play. And then they have these big balloons and these cushions, with the children's games. And then they have these breakout sessions where between these entertainment, they sit down and they brainstorm. And they come up with unbelievably crazy ideas. Not obviously all are going to work, but because they've been in this new environment, it causes them all to think differently. Now, you could think, why can't I just sit in my office and do that? Listen, some people have that creativity and they could. But it helps a lot if you do things differently, when you're in a different environment, different mindset, different expectations. Suddenly you're back to your childhood, playing around, frolicking in the sand. It tends to evoke new voices or new reactions that you would not have evoked on your own had you not had that type of experience, that new experience. So Pesach it's not quite a playground in that sense, but it also creates, it's a shift. Create preparation for Passover is intense. It's not just like Shabbos where you really prepare one day or a few days at most. Passover requires, whether it's the cooking or the matzah or the cleaning out of the house, requires a whole series of activities. Unfortunately, most people don't realize that it's not just a ritualistic thing. They forget that the key thing is to change your mindset. So that's number one. It's an environment change. If you think about it that way, guaranteed that new stuff will come out. It's always that way. You change something, there's always going to be. Every action has a reaction. But you have to apply yourself. It can't be mechanical. If you just say, okay, you know what, I'm now in a new place, but I'm not even thinking about it. You have to bring yourself into the type of mode, which of course compels us to ask the question, so what is this obsession with the crumbs and bread? And leavened bread. I mean, at the end of the day, matzah and bread are made of the same ingredients, water and flour. So what exactly is the real difference? If you said no water and flour, no carbs, okay, fine. Then we're going to eat something completely new. We're going to eat bitter herbs alone. You're saying one bread instead of another bread, basically. So what's the significance of that? So as you may know, the words in Hebrew for matzah and chametz, which is the word for leavened bread on Pesach, is the same three Hebrew letters. Mem Tzadik is exactly the same. And the third letter, so matzah has a Mem Tzadik Hey, and chametz has a Mem Tzadik preceded by a Ches. A Hey and a Ches is the whole difference, and a Hey and Ches are exactly alike as well. They're both like a house. They both have like a roof and two legs. Like an upside down, let's say, do we have something in English language? Upside down U. But it have to be square. A U is a circle. But think of it an upside down, a square U, so to speak, with right angles. So that's a ches. A hay has three legs, a roof, and so to speak, two legs like this. But the left leg is split, is cut off, disconnected from the roof. So the whole difference between chametz and matzah. You mind opening the window there, please? He'll open. Just open. It's a little hot in here. Yeah. So the difference between chametz and matzah is not only in one letter. In the same letter, it's the difference whether it's a connected line or a space. If I had a pen, I would make an image, but I think you all visualize what I'm talking about. Okay. Now, what's the significance? You ever see a kettle? When a kettle boils, the key is that it has to have a spout. If it doesn't have a spout, what will happen? It will explode. That's a metaphor for the difference between a ches and a hay. All energy, when it gets bottled up and doesn't have a place to release, becomes either implodes or explodes. Chametz, it's a closed box. There's no breathing room. There's no space. The hay has what we call the space of humility, that little space. It's like the pause. That before you jump and make a conclusion, you pause for a moment. It lets the air in and out. What's the difference between chametz and matzah, bread and matzah? It's not, yes, they're both made of flour and water, but one is not allowed to rise. There's no sour dough allowing it to rise and become inflated. The difference between you put a matzah and a piece of bread, you'll see. One is full of air, more air than substance. It's inflated. It's self-contained and inflated. Matzah is the bare minimum. So matzah is called the bread of humility, like the hay. So it's the same ingredients, and it's supposed to be the same ingredients. You don't want to have different ingredients. You want to take the same personality that you have all year round, and you want to add one element to it. Actually, not add, subtract one element. The inflation. We all have self. We all have a sense of self. We all have egos. The question is it an inflated ego? Is it a self-contained ches that has no breathing room and it's all about me? Or is there some opening? There's a story, a classic story, with the Maral of Prague, they say, where he once came to that town, and one of his students became a great wealthy man, but he was a miser, and he was disliked in the town. He never opened his home for guests, never shared. He was completely self-absorbed. One day the Maral comes to town, comes to visit. So of course, the miser doesn't see anyone, but his Maral is a great teacher, he'll see. Maral comes in, he sees in his home a great palace, a fortress, and one of the collections that this wealthy man had were mirrors. He had mirrors of all shapes and forms and sizes and designs. Mirrors, mirror on the wall, everywhere. Maral immediately understood and said to the man, he said, it's years since we've studied, I want to ask you a question. Tell me, I see you have all these mirrors. What makes a mirror a mirror? What turns a mirror into a mirror? A mirror is a pane of glass, just like a window. What turns it from a window into a mirror? So the man said, very simple. He thought the Maral didn't know, but he wanted him to answer. So he said, you take a pane of glass and you smear silver on the back, and suddenly glass, which was see-through, now becomes reflection of you. You no longer can see through it. No one can see you. All you see is yourself. So Maral said, exactly. When you spread silver on a person and their ego, they suddenly become self-contained. And instead of seeing others, and others can see them, they only see themselves. Well, the man understood the message quite quickly. He was not a fool. But an interesting analogy. So matzah and chametz, I don't know the end of the story, whether it changed anything, but the point is the story itself, the message. The difference in matzah and chametz, we all have a self. We all have an ego. And it's actually a healthy part of ourselves. If we had no self, no ego, you wouldn't protect yourself. You could turn into a doormat, a shmata. You know what a shmata is? Like a rag. Or others step on you. We need to protect our interests. At the same time, we know self and ego can also bring people into all trouble comes from self and ego. Your ego becomes you become too self-important, where you become so self-absorbed and self-righteous. Not only can you hurt others, you can do far worse. All crime is based on that. You don't think about another, you think about me. You lose your empathy, you lose your sensitivity. It's about me. You start justifying anything. It all originates from a sense of self. If we felt that we were all part of one organism, as the Talmud says, that all of us are part of one body, is it conceivable that the right arm would hit the left arm, even if it misbehaved? But we don't sense that. We become self-absorbed. Instead of glass, we become a mirror. And all you see is yourself. Me, and what I need. And everybody else becomes basically a prop in your play. Now, nobody likes to think of themselves that way, but that's what self-interest, that's what selfishness is. So, Pesach doesn't want to annihilate the ego. He doesn't want to destroy the flour and water, which is symbolic, by the way, of the body and the soul. It wants to temper it and recognize that it should be at the minimum. You need to have a self, but not an inflated self. Not a ches that's self-contained and nothing can go in and out, but a hay that has a breathing, has a little window where people can come in and out like the glass. You can see through. So, if you think of it that way, then the second point I'm making is, besides Passover being a new environment, it's not just a new environment, it sets the tone for a new way of looking at yourself. So Pesach is, bluntly put, exactly that, to look at the way you worship yourself or don't worship yourself. Now the interesting twist here is, self-worship doesn't always mean that you're pompous and arrogant and think you're the greatest guy. Self-worship can also take on an inverted shape of thinking you're the worst person. But you decide that you are. Self means that you worship whatever you think about yourself. If you loathe yourself, that could also be self-worship. Because who decided when someone says, I'm worthless, who do you think you are to say you're worthless, Look who thinks he's nobody. You'll know that joke. The rabbi gets up on Yom Kippur and he's banging his chest and repenting and saying, I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm nobody. And he's trying to annihilate his ego. The gabbai in the synagogue, the beadle, the assistant, does the same thing. Bang his chest, look, I'm nobody, nobody. And then some simple guy sees both of them doing it, so he also starts saying, I'm nobody, I'm nobody. So the gabbai says to the rabbi, look who thinks he's nobody. That's the joke part. Or like on Simchas Torah, they said, okay, now we're going to give an aliyah. We're going to call up to the Torah the most humble man in the synagogue. So what do you think happens? The most humble man obviously is not going to go up. But two guys start rushing. And one guy makes it first. And he gets the aliyah. And later they ask the guy, how is it possible? He says, he says, I'm far humbler than he. He says, he was faster than I was. That was the problem. He wasn't humbler, he was faster. So humility is a critical component in understanding what Passover is. So it's about not just going into a new environment, it's going into that sense of looking at yourself. As I said, a self can take on the shape also of someone who's self-loathing. I'm hopeless, I'm helpless, I'm lost, it's all over for me, I'm worthless. Those statements are equally pompous, except they're not pompous in the sense where I can do anything. It's you've determined your destiny. Who are you to determine? There's also a God in this world. Your soul. Who are you to give up on yourself? Excuse me. I have a little cold, so I hope you don't apologize for my... No, the window is perfect. We just pick up that urban legend that they used to tell us if you go out without a cold, you get a cold. Without a coat, you get a cold. I don't know if that's accurate. That's just you're exposed to the cold, you get a cold. You're exposed to microbes, you get a cold, right? We'll say l'chaim, It's plain water, straight. Yeah. No, I'm fine. Perfectly fine. Just a cold, it's all right.
Rabbi Jacobson. How could it be self-worship if you loathe yourself and then you're not worshiping yourself?
You're worshiping the perception of yourself. That's the key. You're worshiping your perception of yourself. And the whole point of Judaism in general, and you could say God for that matter, what value does God have if God is just rendered into another extension of ourselves? The whole point of the idea of a God is that there's something greater than you and I. Something larger. Something that lifts us up to a place that we may not have believed that we can achieve on our own. It infuses us with hope. In different terms, you can say that's our soul. The body or the material world is subject to the laws of nature. We age. We physically age. But then you'll see people, even though they're physically aged, there's a sparkle in their eyes, and they get younger in spirit. Why? Because they don't allow their bodies to define their destinies. Obviously, they're aged physically, and there's their birth date. Their birth date goes up year to year. But what controls their lives is their attitude and their spirit. And that is not completely in our control. So real freedom doesn't mean that you're free of someone imposing themselves on you. Real freedom means that you're free of you imposing upon yourself. That you're free to be yourself. That there's no force outside of you that imposes itself upon you. So freedom then is far more connected to our perception than on technical matters. And the first challenge, as I said, is the self. Perception of self and what we do about it. And that sets the stage. I assure you that if you go into Passover, just with that mindset, you're already going to have something that's going to be different. See, most people just enter Pesach. Yes, they may have their house clean for Pesach. They eat kosher for Passover foods. They do everything right. But they're the same. They're the same. The attitude is the same. It's just different clothing, different foods. The key is to look at those differences and say, okay, I'm now in a new environment. I'm no longer in the same toxic world that I was a day before. And what am I going to do about it? So this leads me now into the actual Seder experience. After we state these things. Another thing I should add in the self, the trap with the self, is self-confidence. Because our perceived self can be so sometimes fatalistic or lack of lacking self-esteem, it also makes us feel that we can't really do anything. So we basically, once you convince yourself you don't have power, it's almost impossible to change that, even if you have all the power in the world. You see this even with very talented people, geniuses, athletes. They get into a funk, they lose confidence, and suddenly what they were able to do yesterday, they don't feel they can do it. Now nothing's changed. Their talent is the same. They had no injury. And there's something got into their heads. And they don't have quite the same, they second guess themselves. You see good coaches, what they do, whether it's a tennis pro or some other pro in that sense, they have to teach them to regain their confidence. And confidence is a major part, especially when you're achieving excellence and you go up to the highest levels. It's not just talent, it's confidence. There are people who have a lot of talent but they don't have the confidence and they can't manage. So the idea of going into a new environment, Pesach, saying, you know what, I'm going to put aside all my self-negative thinking and negative thoughts aside for one day, for 8 days, let's say. But let's begin with one day at a time, Monday night. We'll set it all aside. Not telling you to totally destroy it, because it's a voice inside you, but set it aside. At least give it the benefit of the doubt that perhaps there is possible change. I see this especially in the area many people deal with, struggle with shidduchim, finding a soulmate. So I see that as time passes, it's like with every day that passes, it's a day that works against you. Because as they say, if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. So when things don't work, so every day you lose a little less, you lose more confidence. You say, if it didn't work for me for 40 years, for 30 years, for 20 years, whatever it is, suddenly now it's going to change. That itself becomes the most self-defeating mechanism. How do you fight that? So there are many ways to fight it, of course, and we're going to discuss some of them. But one of them is you have to put aside your conviction, your negative conviction, that is, that things can't change. Because that alone could be the biggest problem. I know someone who was dating a woman. And they were dating for a while. They were really liked each other and it looked very promising. But then all his self-doubt started coming in. Is she really the right one? And started comparing to other people he's dated. Anyway, he basically lethargized the whole thing. So it died in its so-called inertia. Didn't go anywhere. After a while, the woman started wondering what's going on with this guy, and his second guessing himself, basically undermined anything positive that was going on. Of course, the woman also sensed it, like what's going on. She didn't understand. Later, she told me, I met her after they broke up. She said to me she was ready to get married to him, but there was nothing missing. Simply, she was smart enough to realize he simply just has a lack of self-confidence. And he had no idea, and she told me not to tell him this. So he was giving me all kinds of excuses why it didn't work out. And I knew it had nothing to do with any of that. He created his own story. He created his own image. I didn't know what to do because it was clearly, once a person creates their own story, their own perception of themselves, what he's supposed to do. And he wasn't blaming it on her. He was blaming it on himself. This thing doesn't work. That thing, all kinds of stuff. And I was just telling him, listen, why don't you just take the leap? Everything seems good on paper. There's no real reason. It was just a fear that had no explanation. And it was clearly coming because of years of just letting things go, not getting committed. So it became easier for him, no commitment than commitment. Even though he was miserable not being committed. But it was his comfort zone. He was really used to it. So he was almost writing his own script. Okay, you know what? Anyway, the story's not over yet. I did get them together again. However, obviously he has to want, because I can't do it for him, and no one can do it for him. But I say, so right now, excuse me. Right now, they're dating again. I'm trying to give him a little coaching, but I see clearly with my own eyes, it's all about his own self-perception. Goes back many, many years to his childhood. And what happened was that now, that's been years, he's I think 38, 39, maybe a little older. Now that he's gone through those years, so whatever those negative self-perception is hardened now, and we're dealing with a hard crust. And frankly, it's only going to take a leap. He's going to have to take a leap. I don't see any other way. It's not going to come with therapy. It's not going to come some type of epiphany. So to come taking a leap is like a person who didn't swim for 20 years and is just standing around the pool for 20 years waiting to see how he's going to learn to swim. The only way is you jump in or you're pushed in and you start swimming. You realize, maybe you're not a perfect swimmer, but at least you're in there. At least you're in the ring. The guy, I mentioned that story with the paratrooper. Well, the guy that was wanted to become a paratrooper. So he went up. What you do is you go into training. You go up on the plane with other paratroopers experienced. You watch them, observe them, see the methods, see them build confidence. You're around people who know how to do it. Anyway, this guy, his turn comes after a month of training. Okay, the sergeant tells him, okay, today is your day. I'm going to strap you up. You won't be first. Watch a few people, observe them, and now you're going to jump. Anyway, he comes, great, he's all excited, he's all strapped up, blah, blah, he's in line. Comes his turn, he looks down, he's got a panic attack. He runs back, no. So, the sergeant has seen this too. So he said, okay, we have people like that, they're slow learners. Another month. Okay, another month of hanging around every day, flying. Month passes, now your turn. Okay, this time he thinks he can do it. Same thing happens. He comes, he's terrified. So the sergeant tells him after they land, look, some people are made for this, some aren't. You just don't have it in you. You could always join another part of the military. You don't have to be a paratrooper. No, Sergeant, I really would do anything. Do me a favor. I'll help out on the plane. I'll be an assistant. I want to be among everybody. He says, but you're never going to learn to jump. He says, it's true. I'm never going to learn to jump, but I like to be around people who have the courage to jump. No, so he won't jump, but he likes to be around the people who have the courage, which is also something, but obviously that's not enough. And you do need to have that ability to take a leap, which is why God comes into the picture, because we say, you take a leap, but you have God holding on to you. He's holding your hand, you're not going alone. Which makes it somewhat easier. Which of course, you need to have a relationship with God. You need a God that's not an extension of your fears. So this goes back to the stereotype. So many people relate God to fear, and to anger, and to guilt, and all that. You need a God that is a freeing force, sensing there's a higher reality that's holding on to you, or is giving you your soul every morning, and telling you can do it. And of course it helps tremendously when you also have friends, and as I said before, an environment that's not toxic. So this is the stage that's set on Pesach. It's meant to create a new, fresh environment, meant to evoke in you a new attitude, to look at yourself in a new way, a matzah way instead of a chometz way, and to open yourself up to new possibilities. Frankly, all that is already a mouthful. And if we didn't have a whole Seder to do, I could say you could all go home and just follow those steps, and you already have, I believe, some form of liberation if you actually apply yourself. But since there's much more, So I'll share a little more about the Seder. And the truth is, I said, sometimes too much is too little. It dilutes it. But think of what I said till now as one segment, and you can take that, and that's already a full story itself. But the Seder is meant to be for everybody. So it has many more tools than just the ones I just mentioned. But all the tools are coming to do the same thing. They're coming to challenge your self-perception. Because that's the only way to get out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, let's go back, it means, Meitzar means inhibitions, fears, insecurities, constrictions, real or perceived. Everything, anything, you could fill in the blanks. So my first suggestion is, not my first, I've already made some suggestions, but practically, maybe you should write down before Pesach, before Passover, why don't you write down a list of your Mitzrayims? Write Mitzrayim on the top column, and here are my Mitzrayims. Whatever they are, you're writing it for yourself, you don't have to show it to anyone. Your fears, your inhibitions, your concerns, your unknowns. You'd be surprised by writing it, that itself has a certain healing quality. Why? It doesn't mean it changes it, but it's like it almost defangs the enemy. The worst thing of the enemy is that it thrives in secrecy. Like anything, as soon as you shine a light, things change. As soon as you're able to even articulate a real problem, a real shame, thing that you're embarrassed of, just articulating is a somewhat freedom. So I'm not suggesting necessarily to someone else. That would be also good if you had someone you can trust, but at least to yourself. Because then you're at least saying, okay, here are the Mitzrayim. Make a list of 4 or 5 of them. And say, I wish that this Passover, these should all be eliminated, would be great. But let's say diminished. Even by some dent, some progress, something that has not happened till now, that's an achievement. Because first of all, you've changed the status quo. You've shifted it. Instead of it going downhill, now you've at least so-called stopped it, or even reversed the process. But it's important to spell it out. Nothing wrong. Mitzrayim. What is your Mitzrayim? I can't see someone experiencing Passover without asking that question and answering. But if you don't know what your Mitzrayim is, what are you doing exactly? We're remembering that the Jews left Egypt 3,325 years ago. That's beautiful. It's nice, but what is it doing for you? What's your Mitzrayim today? What is it? Guaranteed everybody has theirs. If just to get rid of the next excuse that you can't find them, if you need help, just give me a call. I'll help you define them if you like. Not that I know it, but if we talk. But I rest assured, I'm very confident that you could probably find your Mitzrayim and define it. The challenge is finding the Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's the challenge. The Mitzrayim part, you don't need me to remind you what things that inhibit or frighten you. So now that you have all that I've mentioned, you already have something to work with. It's not like just some type of, Pesach comes, I want to be free, I want things to go well. You have something to work with. And confidence is always built in small steps where you see you can succeed. On a small thing, you realize you can succeed more the next step. Like go back to the analogy of swimming. Someone who has difficulties jumping in and swimming, you say, jump in for 2 minutes. You go to the edge of the water, shallow, and let's just do a little few exercises there. And the next day, a little more. That's how you do it. You don't have to suddenly, cold turkey, change everything. So now, with these key preliminaries, we enter into the world of the Seder. Okay? Seder consists of 15 steps. I've actually done this workshop in 15 steps in detail. You may remember. It's recorded. You can probably get an MP3 on our website. But I'm not going to go through all the 15 as I've done it there. But I will go over some key elements. We'll spell them all out. And actually, as a summary of what we did then in that workshop, created this interesting Haggadah companion. You can just stick it into your Haggadah. I decided instead of another Haggadah, there's so many Haggadahs out there. The Maxwell House Haggadah, and there's this Haggadah and that Haggadah. There's a Google Haggadah now, I hear. It's a joke. And a Microsoft Haggadah, an Apple Haggadah, an Amazon Haggadah, no? Not yet. Okay, yeah. So I decided instead of making another Haggadah, which maybe I'll do one day, I decided to make a Haggadah. This can go into all Haggadahs. Hey, it's just write. What have to recreate the wheel? Just write on what they have. And this was meant to be a summary, just brief. If you go online and meaningfullife.com, you can print out a whole bunch of resources. I've done a lot of material on Pesach, on the 4 cups, on the Seder plate, on the 15 steps, on matzah, on maror, etc., etc. So this is more of a summary, but if you read it briefly, you'll see there are key points that you can definitely embellish upon. And this is great both for yourself or for any Seder you'll be attending as a guest or as a host, where you can use it as a catalyst, as a point of discussion that you can get others involved as well. Now obviously you need to have cooperation. Some people just want to get to the meal. They're not interested in any talk. So you have to play that case by case. But just in case you do have friends, or maybe I do suggest be a Seder which is more meaningful than mechanical, you have some material here that you can use. So 15 steps. I'll go through them and I'll talk about the key so-called structure of it. So of course there's the Pshat, Remez, Drus, Sod, which is there's the literal meaning behind the 15 steps, which I will not go through here today. The literal you can all figure out on your own, which is literally what we do. You make Kaddish on the wine and so on. I want to talk more about the psychological, emotional, personal significance of it all, and the order. Now, frankly, if someone does all 15 steps thoroughly, you'll probably spend all night psychological introspection, which is actually what you read in the Haggadah. You find that the sages, some of them did spend all night talking about the Haggadah until their students came and told them time of Krishma has arrived. So it's interesting. There were people who actually spent all night doing the Pesach Seder. So I don't know if we could expect that from all of us, but listen, if you get immersed in that way, in this process, I definitely commend you, and that would be beautiful. Please let me know that happens. Velva, what do you think? People by 6, 7 a.m., they're really the process of going through all of this, huh? With 4 cups of wine or more, and he's still awake. That would be very admirable. So the 15 steps, in addition to what I've said, because everything I've said is part of the process, in a way are like a microcosm of some of the things I said before: the new environment, the freeing yourself of the toxins, the attitude, looking at yourself in a new way, harnessing that self, getting rid of the negative self-perception, and identifying the mitzrayims, the inhibitions and the fears and those trappings that limit us. So if you see the first step, Kaddish, which literally means Kaddish means to sanctify. So you'll see how I define reciting Kaddish. Separate. We begin the Seder with Kaddish, making a blessing over wine. Kaddish means to sanctify. We sanctify God's name and the wine by blessing it. Kaddish also means to separate, referring to the separation between good and bad, holy and mundane. So every Jewish ritual you'll see always begins with Kiddush. Shabbos, make a blessing under a chuppah. You see, making a blessing on wine is always a sacred opening. But Kaddish really is the idea of changing environments. It means to separate, like distinguishing and saying, I'm going to now enter into a sacred space. Whenever you enter into a sacred space, you go in with a new attitude. So it all begins with Kaddish. The whole thing begins with Kaddish. Obviously, there are more lessons in it. One of them, I think, a good, interesting one is wine is a symbol of aggression, especially red wine. It's always a symbol of strength. Sanctifying your aggression means not allowing it to become a dominant force in your life, in your relationships, is the first step of Kaddish. Interestingly, though it's not part of the Seder, before Kaddish, the women in the home light candles. And lighting candles is ushers in the holiday. And lighting candles is like the antithesis to sublimating or taming aggression. Lighting candle is lighting a small flame, and a little light dispels much darkness. There's no aggression at all. Light is a very subtle force and eliminates darkness. So both the lighting of the candle and making the Kaddish are two openings that create a new type of environment. After Kaddish, there's urchatz. Washing the hands, cleanse. We wash hands before dipping a vegetable, karpas, in salt water. Every new process requires a cleansing. Following the separation between the mundane and the sacred, we submerge our hands in water, cleansing our tools in preparation for the following 13 steps. So again, you see in Judaism, you make Kiddush, then you go wash your hands. Why do we wash our hands? It's not to clean from dirt. It's symbolic of the mikveh. So there's total immersion when you immerse your entire body in a body of water, in a ritual bath, which is a mikveh. But there was also in the temple was a kir. A kir was a fountain where the priests would wash their hands before they began to serve. So though it's not total immersion, but it's immersion of your fingers, especially of your hands, because your hands are the primary tool that people use to interact with the mundane world. So you wash your hands as a form of cleansing. In the context of what we've been discussing, if Kaddish is creating a new environment, urchatz is an attempt of cleansing or clearing up, cleaning away any of the grime, the so-called psychological grime that we carry in. That would mean literally trying to focus on the positive and not let any of your haunting thoughts affect you, as much as we can control that. It's anything that helps clean out your mind, your heart, because the emptier you are, the more you'll be receptive to the next steps. If you come into an environment and you're filled with all those negative thoughts or negative stuff, there's no room to enter. There's nothing to enter inside. There's no room for it to enter in your mind, a new approach. So then comes step 3, karpas. Karpas is a word in Aramaic. Actually, different commentaries discuss what it means, but it refers to eating a vegetable dipped in salt water. So here we go. If the first is separate, cleanse, now get unstuck. Any of you are familiar with this word, stuck? Have you ever been stuck? You ever been stuck? Yeah. There are many ways to be stuck. Stuck is a very uncomfortable place to be, because it's very demoralizing. Is the sound working all right? Huh? It's very demoralizing, and because it's like, you ever see, it's actually pathetic in a way, but painful. Something is stuck in cement or stuck in glue. Or in this case, psychologically, emotionally stuck. It's like the more you try to get out of it, the worse it gets. You get yourself completely tangled. You have to untangle a wire. And you have wires or threads untangling. The hardest part is because it gets so tangled, you get frustrated, you start pulling, and it gets worse. So what you need to do is counterintuitively be patient and start untangling the edges, the easier parts, and just isolating the more tangled area. This also happens with our hair, right? If there is shampoo that is anti-tangling shampoo, what is it called? Entanglement. So get unstuck. The vegetable grown in the ground represents the body. Salt water represents salty tears shed in emotional or painful times. Salt is a cleanser. Tears are an expression of the soul. We cleanse our bodies with our soul's tears, freeing ourselves from the illusion that the material world is the only reality. It's a fascinating phenomenon, tears. Physical tears are essentially, it's a form of liquid found in the tear ducts. But when an emotion wells up inside of you, for some reason it affects your tears. It affects it fills the liquid into the ducts, and it bursts out into tears. Tears, there's also natural tears, not the ones we cry, the natural film that's necessary to bathe the eye, that it should be lubricated and healthy. If, God forbid, the eye gets dry, it can get damaged. So things that are very sensitive need to be bathed and immersed in liquid. Okay. Interesting, tears are also, as I said, salty. So the Kabbalists say that tears bathe your soul. They're like a bathing agent. They're like a what's the word? Not soothe. A salve for your soul. A person who cannot cry, unfortunately, what happens is the feelings begin to build up inside, and they become those knots that their bodies actually tighten up. Tears are in a freedom of expression. It's a certain expression when a person is able to just cry. So a person who's able to feel empathy, feel sadness over their own situation, it's a good sign. Because when you don't feel, it means you're numb, then you're not really in touch. Someone told me the other day, for years and years they haven't cried. Just recently they begin to have the courage to cry. They didn't cry because their father told them years ago, only babies cry. It became like a crime to cry, because it exposes the dysfunction of the family, that something is wrong. No one cries here. We all smile. Smile, smile, smile. Forced smiles for the pictures. And then just recently in therapy, he finally found the courage just to cry. And it's a freeing experience. In our society, men crying is not popular, not considered macho. But tears, healthy tears, are a very healthy force. So step 3 is awareness. A person does not cry over something that they should cry, means that they're out of touch. And somewhere that pain is being bottled up. It's not going away. It's not like they're so tough and nothing affects them. It's just not expressing itself. So crying is a form of awareness. If you make your list of Mitzrayim, I think many times it'll probably make you cry. So I'm not worried about this third step, actually. If it doesn't, you can rest assured there's something missing. There's some numbness, there's some detachment. And it's understandable. Sometimes we get detached because it's too painful. So you'd rather detach yourself from the pain, numb yourself to be more comfortable. So kappas is that type of sensitivity. And as I just read, the vegetable represents the body, the tears represent, the salt water represents the tears. So we move to number 4, yachatz. Everybody following so far? So good. Yachatz. So this is open up. Breaking the middle matzah. Matzah, which consists of the bare minimum of flour and water, as I elaborated earlier, without any inflating air, represents bittul, the ability to transcend our own viewpoints and not allow in a higher truth. Breaking the matzah is breaking the self. But not just breaking the self, it's breaking the bittul of the self too, because some people also glorify their humility. They say, hey, look how humble I am, like those 2 guys I mentioned before. Look how humble I am. And a key element here is to realize that you have to learn to, as I said earlier, get out of your own perception, including sometimes breaking the matzah even in you as well. Now, breaking here shouldn't be confused with breaking as in destroying. It means with challenging yourself, challenging your perception, allowing in another perspective. Which leads us, of course, to the bulk of the Haggadah, which is Magid. The word Haggadah means to relate the story. That's Magid. So number 5 is the bulk of the Haggadah. The bulk of the Seder is from the first 4 steps that I just said are the first 5-10 minutes of the Seder. Magid takes up the large bulk, because you read them from the beginning of the questions that the children ask, from Heilach Ma'anya, through the questions the children ask, and the rest of the whole reading till you get to the last, till we wash our hands again, number 6, which we'll get to in a moment. So Magid is the big bulk. Magid is the most fascinating aspect of them all. What is the greatest form of freedom? Talk about freedom. The freedom to ask questions. the freedom to tell the story. Look at totalitarian regimes throughout history. The first thing they establish when they come into power is what? Is a bureau of truth and information. You can rest assured that if someone's establishing a bureau of truth and information, it's neither true nor information. Because what do you need them for? But they know mind control. They know the only way to control people is to control information flow. So they need to control the media, the airwaves, television. Jews celebrate Passover. We encourage our children to ask questions. We make sure that they challenge us, they provoke. We provoke them, they provoke us. And the story is told. There's no silencing. The story is told. So Magid is the greatest demonstration that we could sit at a table and argue and question and be skeptical and go from every perspective and allow ourselves to be challenged and to challenge others. That is a very extremely healthy way of getting out of your stuck place. Because, number one, it is empowering and validating that someone says, let me hear what you say. Tell children, I want to hear your question. How many adults give children time even? I want to hear your question. And I will spend time now to answer your question. And then causes you to have questions. And it's a dialogue. You see today, a big part of healing, especially like in the 12-step programs, or others, is a big part of it is social connection. Peer-to-peer. Not even necessarily always having a professional. Peer-to-peer. There's some power of synergy when people communicate. When people break the silence. When people see, hey, my problems, I see others have similar problems. I'm not alone with my misery. These things have very powerful healing agents, because there's something that we give each other strength with. So the Seder overall, but especially the Maggid section, is with interaction. That's what it is. We read about the interaction and we interact. I find it so sad because so many people share with me their Seder experiences where it's been done so mechanically. The Maggid itself is okay, we're reading. There's no conversation. There's no discussion. The whole point of Maggid, what does Maggid mean? It means to relate. So yes, of course you can read the Haggadah, there's a technical text you should be reading. But the spirit is a discussion. So the children ask the 4 questions, it's also mechanical. The key is to engage. To engage that children remember as they grow into adults, wow, that was an unbelievable moment when I asked the questions. It was an unbelievable moment. I was able to be like an equal with my family, with my older brothers and sisters, my parents. I mean equal, not as an equal, but I mean to say equal time. We have a conversation. So Maggid is a tremendous tool, both number one for children to preempt their Mitzrayim from turning into monsters, and number 2, for us who already have Mitzrayim, those monsters, to perhaps start subduing it and weakening its hold by saying, yeah, I want to hear what you have to say. When's the last time someone asked you your opinion? When someone respected your opinion in the real way? These things tend to bring out the best in us. And I say this again and again. That's why it's critical to have friends that you can trust, friends that empower you, that friends that value your opinion, value you. Doesn't mean you're always right, but it means that you're validated enough, valuable enough to say something, to have an opinion, to have a position, not be silenced or weak and so on. So obviously many of us will say, well, if nobody gives me room to speak, I don't feel comfortable. That's why you have to find a good table, a good Seder place where people will give you that right, that ability. So Maggid. I write here, parameterize. I don't even remember why I wrote that. Let me read it in a moment, we'll figure out. Okay. No, I know, because here I'm focusing on the parameters, telling the story. So here we go. The Haggadah is the story of our lives, of all harsh and oppressive forces in our personal Mitzrayim and our liberation from them. If we convince ourselves that our constraints are normal and healthy, we cannot free ourselves. So we tell the story, our story, by defining the parameters of our own internal exile we begin the process of redemption. Okay, so parameterized means actually so-called telling the story, expressing it. Yeah. Remember, it reminds me of the story. One of the Holocaust survivors, a child at the time, and he witnessed, brutal torture and murder of one of the Jews. Before the guy died, the Jewish man died. He said to him, he whispered to him, he said, "You're going to survive this. Remember to tell the story. Never keep this a secret. Tell the story." And the guy tells that for years he was unable to tell any story. He was so mortified by the whole experience. Not just that, the entire time being in the camps, excuse me, and witnessing so much death. People who are traumatized often go into this shock, completely cut off, completely silent. They can't even speak. Have guilt why they survived. All the different stuff. But it always haunted him. He said that here was a man made him make a promise and said, "You have to tell the story." He didn't realize how difficult, how prophetic those words were, because the man realized that it was going to be difficult to do so. So finally, one Yom Kippur night, he decided, something struck him. He was getting older already, and he began to tell the story. He told me that the catharsis, the healing that he went through as a result, was impossible to describe. He says, not that the pain went away, not that the losses disappeared, not that it all was no Holocaust, God forbid, but he felt strong again. Because before, the silence was a sign of his weakness. Like he was overwhelmed, became a victim, and he continued to play the victim for the rest of his life. So he says, the guy said, I thought he meant to tell the story that they should remember me, they should remember us. He was really telling me to tell the story so you should remember yourself, that you should remember that you have the ability to tell, the courage, and you should have the confidence, you should feel validated enough that you can say, this happened to me, or happened to others. And it was a sign of an element of dignity. When you destroy a person's life, God forbid. And what the Nazis did, they didn't even leave tombstones. There's no memories, you don't even know where the people are. So what you destroy is also the dignity of a human being. That's the worst of all. The dignity. So allowing people to speak, allowing people to ask questions is respecting dignity. And dignity is malchus. When that becomes stronger, everything else becomes easier to fight. Many of our inhibitions, many of our mitzrayims are a direct product of a lack of that dignity, or a dignity that has been trampled upon. So now begins after Magid, which is, as I said, really covers the Haggadah all the way till we go to wash again. So the next 6 to 15 step 15, is the second half of the Haggadah, essentially. Well, I shouldn't say that. I say that this is the first half we just did. There's the middle part, and then there's the second half. The middle part begins with Rach, so we go wash again. So I read here, prepare. Once we are elevated to a higher level of holiness through the first 5 steps, we wash our hands again, preparing ourselves for the next stage of spiritual growth. We take our newly formed psychological mindset of freedom and begin to actualize it in our material lives. Okay. So this basically states almost like we're going now to another level in the Seder itself. As I said earlier, if you manage everything I've said till now, I'd be very happy. But as I said, the Seder is a comprehensive system. It does not stop. It allows all levels and stages, so it has another stage of development. Rachza. So we wash our hands. This time we make a blessing. This washing leads to 2 steps that are like 7 and 8. Consider 2, but they're like really built into 1. It's called Moitzi Matzah. So Moitzi is making the blessing on the bread, as we make our usual bread, and Matzah is the special bread, the special blessing we make on Matzah. So let's read Moitzi. What does the word Moitzi mean? Hamaitzi lechem min haaretz means to the one who draws out bread from the earth. Moitzi. So integrate. What is the point? We begin the process of integrating the spiritual and the material with moitzi, the first blessing on the matzah. Here matzah focuses on the positive side of materialism, on its great potential, which is released when we reveal the divine spark within it. So it's like essentially saying everything, there's embedded sparks, the embedded spiritual energy and opportunities everywhere. When we acknowledge that, we're acknowledging that what we're going to eat now is part of our material life, and we're revealing the spirit, the spark within it. And then comes matzah, step 8, reciting the blessing on the matzah and eating it, faith. By eating matzah, the food of bittul, because I said matzah's bittul is sublimating yourself, not the inflated ego, we assume its qualities. As the Rebbe Marash writes, eating matzah is like eating godliness. On the first night, the Passover matzah is called the bread of faith. On the second night, it's called bread of healing. So now it comes, even though we've drank 2 cups of wine, comes the first bite. Actually, we also had a bite of the vegetable. The first bite of bread, which is bread here, matzah. And that is essentially, you're internalizing a spiritual experience. In other words, you don't just think about humility, you're actually eating a piece of matzah that embodies the state of humility. And that itself has its own power. So what I said earlier about matzah as being looking at yourself in a new way, now you're actually internalizing it. And then there's the other side of it. There's maror, 9. Pain of growth. Eating the bitter herb. The bitter maror teaches us about the process of growth, that setbacks and pain in life strengthen us. The maror is dipped into sweet charosas to demonstrate that even when we need to feel bitterness, its purpose and objective is for us to reach a greater freedom. So maror is sometimes also identified with empathy, feeling the pain of another, feeling your own pain. So though matzah is a pleasant, is a humble experience, but it's not bitter. The bitterness of maror acknowledges, because it's not just escape from all our mitzrayim we've escaped, it acknowledges that there is sadness, but we sublimate it in something that's sweeter, to show us that even the sadness in our life can be turned into a positive, harnessed into a springboard for positive growth. Korach, number 10. That's the sandwich. Eating a sandwich of matzah and maror, you combine 8 and 9. So 10 is 8 and 9, 8 plus 9. Bittersweet. We combine the matzah's earthiness and bittul, and the maror's bitterness dipped in sweet charosas, which means there's a time for the sweet and a time for the bitter. But then we must learn to join them both into one seamless experience called life. The mission for which we are sent here by God, and then we can have freedom. So, as opposed to the previous step where you acknowledge that bitterness is part of life, here you're actually joining it together with matzah, and together they become a formidable force. In personal terms, it's really taking 2 different experiences. One is humble, and one is pain. Humble, or you can say sadness. Humility and sadness can become a potent combination if you use them well. Because we're not talking about sadness that demoralizes or breaks you. It's a sadness that is a catalyst, and combined with humility can really bring a person to very great heights, because they've experienced the sadness of life, but they also have the humility not to become over-consumed by it, and allows them to move to another level. And then comes the last 6 steps, last 5 steps. After this, the Shulchan Aruch is the meal. Any of you hungry? I'm getting hungry. Shulchan Aruch. The Seder takes longer than what I just did here. Depends actually which Seder you attend. Shulchan Aruch is the meal, but the meal, interestingly, as opposed to everywhere else where you do rituals, let's say you pray in the synagogue, then you go to a meal, here in the Seder, the meal is also one of the 15 steps. Eating the festive meal, do it. What does it represent? After the first 10 steps, corresponding to the 10 sefirot, of training to integrate spiritual freedom into our material lives, we are now ready for the first real test. Eating an entire meal in an entirely new way, one permeated with a sense of higher presence and godliness. Question here is whether the meal that you're going to eat now is different than the other meals that you eat. Manishtana, is it different? Not just why is this night different, but why is this meal different than all other meals? So a good litmus test to see if any of this has worked is going to be how you eat this meal. Will it be with more sensitivity? Will it be with more introspection? Will it be helping you learn from even the foods you eat? You learn a certain dimension of lesson in life. You don't just indulge in it and so on. Because at the end of the day, meal is basically a thing we do every day in the year. So here's a regular meal, obviously with Passover foods, but it's meant to be experienced in a new way. Okay? Then we go to Tzafon. I'm being brief because, as I said, there's more material that I'll refer you again. The website, Meaningful Life, elaborates on these 15. But also, I'm touching upon key points that I want to focus on. Tzafon. So Tzafon is eating the afikoman. Reveal. The word Tzafon in Hebrew means actually conceal. To hide. So Tzafon means hidden. After we have eaten a complete meal as free people, a material meal eaten in a spiritual and refined way, we now have the power to reveal that which is hidden and unconscious. Tzafon. Within ourselves and those around us. So, on a psychological level, now we're dealing with a whole new dimension. As I said, this is going to be probably more overwhelming for most of us than not. If you've dealt with your fears till now, in these first 10, 11 steps, then you are able to start entering into the world of the unconscious, where it all is rooted. Because if you remember, I said all the self-perception, all originates somewhere. But it's embedded in a place that we can't access. So all the steps till now were meant to be ways you can access it, ways you can challenge it, ways that you set a new mindset, all the things I discussed before. Tzafon is now entering into the power of the unconscious. So if all the steps till now were done right, you're able to now enter into deeper places of your own psyche. Then comes 13, Beirach, the blessing. The blessing after the meal. Reciting grace, draw down. Beirach gives us the power to ensure that the meal, which is symbolic of all our material experiences, will yield the spiritual energy that lies within the divine sparks. Beirach, to bless, means to draw down. To draw down spirituality and godliness into this physical world. So now begins the process of so-called concluding the Seder and starting to draw its energy into the rest of your life. So Beirach is the first step in that direction. Hallel, reciting praise, psalms of praise, let go. After we have done everything in our power to achieve freedom, we say Hallel, and through these words of praise and we place ourselves in God's hands, we surrender to God to complement whatever we cannot do on our own, and to conclude the process of reaching complete freedom. So it's a way of recognizing I've done what I could, and I now turn to something greater than me to fill in the gaps, to fill in the empty, to do what I could not have achieved. And finally, number 15, God's promise to accept our service. Redemption. Unlike the previous 14 steps, this last and final step does not manifest itself in any prayer or action. We have reached a point that transcends words and praise. After we have completed our Seder service, we are accepted favorably, nirtza, by God. So nirtza means a certain acceptance. It's like, especially children who've been hurt or abused, or children of divorce, have to be told, don't blame yourself. It's a form of acceptance. Be at peace with yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. So nirtza is like the final step, or after 14 steps that we do all these different aspects, comes a place of peace. Basically means peace. It's a certain inner peace. Peace at the core. That I'm fine. I'll manage. If you come away from the Seder with that feeling, you already have detoxified, because most people don't feel that way. They feel, I won't manage, it's difficult, I don't know what's going to be. This is an inner peace, to know that I've done what I could, I let go, and I allow now God to do the rest of it. People who come to that are able to maneuver and navigate life a lot better than those that don't have that, because there's less fear, there's less concerns. It's like, I've done what I can do. Why am I concerned about? When we start second guessing ourselves and we're not sure whether I should do this or that, it's usually a sign that you don't have inner peace. You're not at peace with yourself. Now, I know that's not a simple thing to address, but that's why you have all the steps that are meant to be, each one in its own way, help a person get to a healthier mindset, a healthier environment, a healthier attitude, and healthier actions. So I hope what I've said here has been, even though brief, is at least key points. And you're all wise people, so I'm sure you can take this and develop it, embellish it, and develop it into far greater discussion. Most important is to make it relevant. Not everything I've said here may be relevant to everybody, but some things hopefully are. So the key is to focus on the things that speak to you more than anything else. I would not focus necessarily to master it all. Listen, there's 2 Seders. But you can't accomplish with the first, you could always do in the second. And there's always next year in Jerusalem, but there'll still be a Seder. So the key is to focus on things that are resonate, speak to you, and discuss it with yourself, prepare yourself. As I said, there's much more material on these 15 on our website, meaningfullife.com. Just go and type Seder or 15 steps, you'll find it. And any way I can help, if anyone's questions, please feel free, even though quite swamped and busy, but I'll definitely try to make time to answer any question that comes my way. And with that said, if anyone needs help finding a Seder, we can hope to set you up if you tell us where you are in this part of the world, as well as anywhere out there in cyberspace. And I will therefore bid everyone now a kosher and freilich Pesach, as they say, a liberating, transcendent, meaningful Passover. And remember that you have to be proactive. You have to go on the offense. Don't wait for someone else to do anything for you. You need to empower yourself by saying, I have something to say, I have something to do, I have something that needs change, I have mitzrayim to contend with. And the more you initiate, the more power you'll have. At the same time, it's always great to have people, friends, colleagues, family, and I hope you're able to access that as well, to people that you can trust, people that you can speak to, because that helps always reinforce many of the things I was discussing here. So next week will not be a class because it's Passover. Actually, I'm going to be in the Pocono somewhere. I don't even know where. I'm like a scholar in residence at some Pesach place. But we will resume a week after that, which is after Passover. Actually, the day after Passover is Wednesday. Yeah, it's Isra Chag. And Philip was giving his class tomorrow night, I believe. Yeah. And I know there's some new faces I've not seen, so I welcome you personally. Hope we stay in touch. Everybody's a new face because everybody's renewed every moment, perpetual creation. So it's always good to see everyone here. Those of you that are seeing me and I don't see you, well, you can send me a picture, or you can or record something and send me a little clip. But I wish everyone a really transformative Pesach, and it should actually last. And this next year, we say next year in Jerusalem means this year, and then automatically we'll be there next year. But it also means Jerusalem doesn't just mean physically, it also means personal redemption. So those of you that need to find something specific, like finding your soulmate, may this be the year, Pesach, that finally breaks through any blocks, constraints, mitzrayims. You do your part, God will do His part. So you should find the right, proper soulmate, healthy shidduch, healthy mate, build good families. Those of us that need blessings and health, may there be new openings in that. As I said, matzah is a bread of, also a food of health. Health food, and faith food. So it's faith and health all in one. Pretty good. And those that need blessings in other areas, parnasa, livelihood, there should be new doors that open in that regard, and obviously all in good health. And those that need blessing with children, healthy children, grandchildren, And Bonech Chaim Zeinu Revich, all the whole spectrum of blessings from Aleph to Tov, everybody in their own particular way. And God has all that, He has everything, so no problem for Him to give abundantly. He could, for everyone, share, there's enough to go around for everyone, especially Pesach. So maybe everyone have a real Pesach, a real leaping over all boundaries and all limitations, and we shall see each other, and I'd love to see renewed faces, renewed life, and a whole new stage of experience that will begin after this Pesach. Thank you very much. And let me announce that we do have the Omer book, which we start counting Tuesday night. So it's available here. Also, this will be an app. I think Android is coming out tomorrow, the app, and the iPhone, the iOS, they call it will be next week, because you need another week for approval, whatever. And then we also have the book on Pirkei Avos, which is Beyond the Letter of the Law, Ethics of the Fathers. It's a popular book for many, recently republished. And of course, please make sure to take this with you, complimentary, and use it well. And it's always an honor to really spend time with all of you. Thank you, and be well.